Welcome to our fourth and final installment of discussing Elijah the prophet in medieval Ashkenaz. And by the end of our session today, we will come to the present day. So, in this final discussion, I would like to talk about how Elijah endures and becomes part of the visual culture and the material culture of Jewish practice from medieval Ashkenaz and onwards. And what's really interesting to hold in mind through our discussion is that Elijah is usually unseen, but he is seen to some. And this already starts in the Talmud, where Elijah shows himself to certain sages, and he can walk with the sages, and other people will not see him. So hold in mind this duality of Elijah being seen and unseen, sometimes at the same moment by different people as we go forward. We discussed how Elijah is present in ideas and how those ideas are brought into common knowledge and community shared knowledge and identity through the performance of rituals and rituals in daily life and rituals in the life cycle and in the yearly cycle. And we are going to see how some of these things come together and influence each other. So quick recap. Last week we discussed Elijah's presence in circumcision ceremonies, and we brought the text of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. It is late antiquity, really placing Elijah at circumcision ceremonies from when God tells him after he runs away from Jezebel and Ahab to the desert and has a revelation with God. And from then on, God says, the Israelites shall not observe the covenant of circumcisions until you see it with your own eyes. And from then on, Elijah is connected to circumcision. And then inside Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the connection to the text of Malachi that we've seen throughout, connecting Elijah to being the harbinger of redemption, returning at the end of days, and being the messenger of the covenant. Okay. We also discussed how Elijah embodies and personifies the themes of identity and redemption, specifically in circumcision ceremonies in medieval Ashkenazi communities. Now, when we discussed at the beginning about how Elijah is formulated from moving into the study hall and how rabbis wanted to bring his unwieldy character, his unsociable character, his antisocial character, into the fold of being into the study hall, he was still only part of that elite. He was only seen and interacted with a very elite level of people, but bringing him to a circumcision ceremony, the entire community is there. Elijah starts a process of being more accessible and having a connection with every level of the community, not just sitting with the sages in the study hall. And he represents, we discussed how he represents for the Jews of medieval Ashkenaz also a projection of their own self-identity, of their adherence to the God of Israel and his commandments. A prime example of it being first and foremost circumcision, but also everything else it entails to be a good Jew in medieval Ashkenaz, and all the hardships and challenges that brings in daily life and more broadly as a Jewish community. So Elijah is their model of being able to withstand the pressures and discomforts and of that Jewish existence, and also he is a model of how they can behave and how they can adhere to the identity that they choose, and all that hard work is also paying off, because God will remember who is loyal to him and send Elijah to redeem them. So we have all those themes coming together. Now, last time we focused on Elijah, how Elijah came to become connected to circumcision, and that it's very fitting for his character to have this role. And I'd like to again focus more on the chairs. And what's really interesting is trying to understand real life activity, trying to understand how things worked and how things looked and felt and sounded and resonated with the people living at the time, when our sources are written sources. We have a little bit of archaeology and we have a little bit of external testimonies, but we don't have a lot of objects. And so we kind of have to reconstruct the surroundings that these texts were written in and these texts were consulted in, and the atmosphere and where and the space where these rituals were performed. So we said a little bit last week that chairs had to be prepared, and that chairs, usually furniture, was cheaply made and lightweight. And even when we're talking about nobility, even when we're talking about people who have the means to have physical objects decorate their homes, usually they are the less expensive articles in their homes, and the more expensive things, the luxury items, are usually in fabric. So we see the decoration of the chairs with fabrics. And what's interesting in Machzor Vitri that I'm returning to is that the chairs have to be prepared. And that brings questions of, it seems to be that there were not special chairs that were set aside and always designated for circumcision use. They had to be taken from their regular mundane use and turned into a ritual object temporarily. And this is a very interesting twist of living in a world today. We are used to walking into a synagogue or even into a restaurant sometimes and seeing a whole bunch of chairs there. Whoever wants to sit, there's a chair, and plenty of empty ones waiting to be used, and also a designated chair for circumcision ceremonies. But what happens in a reality where seats are sparse? Were there chairs in synagogues? Were there benches? Were there stone benches around lining the walls? Did people just stand? Where did these chairs come from? Were they already in the synagogue? Did they have to be brought from other places, other homes, and then decorated? Where did these decorations come from? Were they pawns that were left by Jews? There's an interesting discussion in the halachic literature of, can you use fabrics for inside a synagogue or with Torah scrolls that have embroidery of animals on them? There's a discussion here of the lines between what images are acceptable for use in holy and ritual contexts, and what is for mundane use. And all these questions about what does the reality look like of where people are living and how they are practicing and what is on their mind and what they see around them are all questions that we start from passages like this. So here we see that the two cathedra have to be prepared and covered with the fabric. Okay, so now we know that we have two chairs. Now where are they placed? So we have even more of an explanation. Again, we have our characters that we know, our rabbis that wrote a lot and left us with a lot of rich information. And we return again to Rabbi Eliezer of Worms. So he says very clearly, we need two chairs for the circumcision. One is for the Baal Brit to sit on and hold the baby, and one is vacant on the right. So he says that the chair for Elijah is on the right, and that also has an explanation based on the exegesis of a verse talking about put me on your right, or samcheni al yaminecha, have me next, I will help you from your right. So it is the place of honor to be on the right-hand side of where the circumcision is happening. It is designated for Elijah, and also to kind of bless the situation and bless the mohel, that Elijah is going to help him execute everything properly. So here we have an example of 2 chairs. Of course, the images of the chairs that I am showing are much later. We do not have existing chairs from, the earliest ones are from the late 17th century, and the artifacts that we have that survived are 17th and 18th century, 18th and 19th century and beyond. Okay, and that also has to do with material culture developing, and there's more consumerism, and there's more material available, and there's more access, and people can be more creative because there's more to work with, and there's more patronage, and all these wonderful things and beautiful objects that we start seeing in the world. Okay, so we have, very clearly, we have 2 chairs, and they are placed with Elijah's chair on the right. And then we have, interestingly, what happens to them afterwards. So Rabbi Jacob the Cutter also tells us that the cathedra have to be prepared and decorated. And we already discussed that Elijah comes and testifies. But here's the next verse, the next paragraph after that we didn't see last week. Here he says, the chairs don't immediately go back to their mundane use. They don't automatically go back to the rich person's house or to wherever other space they occupy in the synagogue or in the community. He says, the cathedra stays standing in the synagogue, set in splendor for all of 3 days. Why is this established? Why do we do this and leave the chairs for 3 days? So the public will see them and pray for the child and his mother. So it was commonly believed that the most difficult day of recovery from circumcision was the 3rd day. And also in medieval Europe, mortality rates and sickness rates of newborns and postpartum mothers were very high. There's a lot of anxiety about keeping children and mothers safe, a lot of remedies, a lot of customs of laying in and amulets and all kinds of things, because it was a very scary situation. Childbirth and early childhood were fraught with dangers. And so one of the ways of trying to encourage the community to participate in the well-being of the child and his mother is through prayer. And not only was the community coming together to witness and to celebrate and to be part of the circumcision and welcoming the child into the fold of the community fully, but they are also asked to be part of the continuing recovery and pray for him. So we have this, and this custom is also mentioned in the liturgy in some of the piyutim that I mentioned last time. It's discussed that the 3 chairs are set up, and in one of the, you can go back and look at the piyuts from last time, it's also made a connection to redemption, that there's also the theme of 3 days when in some of the apocalyptic traditions of 3 days of the redemption, and part of the processes that happen during the apocalyptic events and period. So always making the connection between the present and the future, and the past tradition that is being continued in the present, and the present is going to encourage the future. Okay, so we have this tradition of these 2 chairs, and they are set up, and they are made beautiful, and they stay in the synagogue for 3 days. That is in the 13th century source. Jumping ahead to 1801. Jumping to the Ashkenazi synagogue in Mantova, Italy. Here we have a description of 2 chairs that are prepared, one for Elijah and one for the Sandik. Until now, it seems like everything's the same. However, these are set up 3 days prior to the circumcision. We have a shift here, about 500 years. Same legacy of tradition, different location, different historical reality, and here the chairs are set up before. Possibly the chairs are set up before to remind the community to come and participate in the circumcision, that there is going to be a ceremony, and encouraging attendance. Also, we will see later that the role of the Sandik, of the Baal Brit, the person who is honored with holding the baby during the circumcision, and the role of the circumciser, the mohel, they are 2 roles that become central in themselves. They become more key players during circumcision ceremonies in the modern period. And it's also part of wider themes of developing professionalism, and we will discuss that when near the end, because there are some beautiful artifacts that are connected to circumcision and the Elijah chairs that show this very nicely. But I do want to discuss this image a little bit. This is the earliest image that we have of a circumcision that has an Elijah chair in it. We see here the circumciser. We see here someone holding a candle. Okay, there's also the candle is also an important part of the ceremony. Candles in general are common in religious rituals and in the setting of the synagogue rituals, because the candle also signifies the soul, and it signifies the connection to Torah. We have the mohel, the circumciser. We have the sandik, who's sitting on a fancy chair, and he also has a crown. And that is kind of a clue that you're supposed to choose someone who has the crown of a good name. You're supposed to choose someone who has good deeds, that you would like the baby to, be held and associated with someone who has a good moral character. And here we have Elijah's chair. And it really says on top, Kiseh Shel Eliyahu, the chair of Elijah. And it is smaller, and it is decorated with greenery, and it is decorated with color, and there's a bowl on top, maybe a bowl of water, but it is slightly smaller than the prominent Elijah Sandik chair. We do have communities that the Elijah chair is smaller, and that really harks back to to the Geonim that we saw last week. That then we prepare a chair for Elijah near the Baal Brit. We don't know what the Baal Brit is sitting on. We don't know what the Sandik is sitting on. Is he on a chair? Is it easier actually to be sitting cross-legged on the ground? There are communities that did circumcisions when the person holding the baby was sitting on the ground, because that was the safest way to hold the baby steady. And Elijah has a small seat. We do have examples of smaller seats, where the chair of Elijah is not a chair to be sat in, but it is more of a ritual object. And sometimes it is hung on the wall of the synagogue, sometimes it is brought out, sometimes it is taken in processions through the city, or brought to the birth chamber of a woman who is in labor to bring good tidings and blessings. So Elijah chairs come in all shapes and sizes, and have different uses in different communities. And we should keep that in mind, that we have a practice and a custom that is so widespread and has such deep roots, its execution looks different in different communities. But here this image is from the beginning of the 16th century, the end of the 16th century, and it is in a customs book, and it is a wonderfully vibrant circumcision scene, and we have a prominent Elijah chair. Okay, so we have this very ingrained presence of Elijah in circumcision. We have an object that signifies his presence. We have all of the traditions and legacy that Elijah's figure carries with him, and when he brings it into the arena of a circumcision and ceremony, and we are now discussing medieval Ashkenaz. We've returned to medieval Ashkenaz. Now that the foundation is set, everyone knows that Elijah's there. Everyone knows Elijah's chair. Everyone knows what he's supposed to do and witness and be part of this identity, and what the themes are, and what the important communal beliefs are that are being brought up again and discussed. And then on top of that, other things can be discussed. And one of them is stories. When we have the setting and we have the background and everybody knows the common knowledge of what it means to be in a certain, to set a story in a certain context, then we can have the stories. And this is a story about a circumcision ceremony that was performed in Regensburg, set in the lifetime of Rabbi Judah the Pious, so set in the 12th century. And this picture is a picture from the archaeological digs underneath the streets in Regensburg into the Jewish quarter that lies underneath street level. And this arch survived the layers and generations of destruction and building over, and was found like this in the archaeological dig. And because the story talks about a window, it is so lovely to have a window that actually survived from the Jewish quarter in Regensburg to share. Okay, and of course I'm going to discuss the story itself in English. So it happened in Regensburg, where there was a custom to stand when an infant was carried into the synagogue to be circumcised. So we're bringing the child in. Once an infant was carried in, and the audience stood before him. So once we have, they're telling us, they're setting up the story, and what is supposed to happen is that when the infant is brought into the hall of the synagogue to be circumcised, everyone stands to greet him. So everyone was standing, except Judah the Pious sat on his bench and did not stand. He's on a bench. So which is a clue that maybe in the synagogue were benches, mainly benches. They asked him, his students asked him, "Our teacher, why did you not stand for him? Why did everybody else is standing? Why are you deviating from the expected behavior?" And he told them, "Elijah is not sitting on his chair near the Baal Brit." So now we know. Elijah has a chair. To everyone else, it looks like the chair is just the same as always, because usually they do not see Elijah. But Rabbi Judah the Pious knows to see Elijah, has that quality, has the special sight, the special gift to be able to see Elijah. And he sees that Elijah is not sitting in his chair as usual. And he showed those who were worthy. He was able to share his miraculous sight, his beyond sight, with those who were worthy, that Elijah sat by an open window of the synagogue. So, on one hand, Elijah is bound by God to be present at every single circumcision. On the other hand, so that's why he's still there. He has to be present. He's standing in the window. But he's not sitting on his chair. He did not enter and sit down. Why not? They asked Rabbi Judah why he was not seated in his chair. And Rabbi Judah answers, because this infant will end up an apostate. Eventually, this infant who is being circumcised and brought into the fold of the community with all of the tradition and all of the meaning and all of the value that we have discussed that is inside in the atmosphere, in the air of the circumcision ceremony, this infant, when they grow up, will turn their backs and reject it completely and become an apostate. We see here a big problem. What happens when an infant is brought into the community, when they are too small to make the choices of what they will be when they grow up? And basically, Rabbi Judah the Pious is saying Elijah knows. Yes, he has to come to every circumcision, but he knows what will be in the end. He knows that this child will end up rejecting everything, and therefore he is present but not present. He is bound by his directive, to have to be there and witness it, but he is not fully committed. And so this story is really a glorifying story of Judah the Pious. It shows how he has special knowledge and shows that he can see Elijah and understand Elijah's actions. And also, there are many stories that discuss Rabbi Judah's interaction with apostates. It is a topic that was really central to the discussion of the time, and especially among Rabbi Judah's circle of students and their students. But here we really have the difference between sitting on a bench and the chairs. We see the chairs are really important. And we also see that Elijah is discerning, that Elijah is still the figure that is loyal to and zealous for the God of Israel and will not tolerate breaking that covenant. And so he will have some sort of say and some sort of keeping his distance when he knows that this child will end up apostatizing. Okay. Now let's complete this circle. We spoke about the apocalyptic traditions and bringing it into the circumcision ceremony, and now how does Elijah come to Seder? How does Elijah become introduced into Passover? And basically it's the same messages being brought in to a new arena. So first we have a discussion of the performative ritual. It is customary to open the door when reciting the passages of Shpo Chamatcha, certain passages that are recited towards the end of the Seder text. According to what is written, not to lock the doors of the house because Passover night is a night of vigil and God is watching over his children. And by the merit of this promise, we will be redeemed. And for this, we open the door at Shvoch, because by this it is worthy for the arrival of Messiah. So here we have the connection between opening the door, discussing hopes for redemption and hopes for vengeance on those who give the Jews a hard time in diaspora, and the arrival of the Messiah, all coming together. But Elijah is not here yet. So we have opening the door. We have the Shvo Chamatcha. We have an extra cup of wine, which we will discuss in a moment. All these things together are around the theme of redemption. And who is the Redeemer? The Messiah. We want the Messiah. So how did the focus shift from the Messiah to Elijah? So, of course, we come back to Elijah being the messenger and Elijah being the harbinger of coming before. And here we have beautifully illuminated Haggadah manuscripts. And in this, we have all kinds of redemption scenes, because redemption is a very central theme of Passover in general. And so they're putting in, we could have a whole series just on the illuminations of Haggadot in Ashkenaz, but we're going to focus on a couple of the redemption scenes. And here we have the Messiah, of course. We have the Messiah riding on a white donkey or a white horse, and the people of Israel are following him out, being redeemed. And here on the side, we have Elijah. So we have Elijah the harbinger. We have Elijah coming before the Messiah. Here we have someone drinking a cup of wine, and we'll discuss the wine in a minute. Here's a close-up of these two pictures, and what it says on top of Elijah is, Elijah the prophet, herald of redemption. Soon, so will be soon, Amen, Selah. These are from two very similar Haggadot. The illustrations are almost identical, but not quite, so they were probably made in the same workshop around the same time. Okay. So what's interesting is Elijah appears in the artistic descriptions of redemption, of messianic redemption, before he appears in the text. And what about the cup? So another object associated with Elijah, of course, is the cup. That's what we know of. That's what we're familiar with. So it was in itself a object of redemption. For all kinds of reasons, blessing the cup, and wine is a symbol of redemption, and making a blessing for redemption on the cup, and all kinds of discussions of how many cups to have at the Seder, and 4 cups of wine for 4 ways that Israel was redeemed from Egypt. And maybe there's a 5th cup of wine to say the grand Hallel, the grand a song of praise to God. So maybe we should say songs of praise and another cup of wine. Or maybe this 5th cup of wine symbolizes a future redemption that did not happen yet. And many texts discuss a cup of wine being part of a blessing for redemption or hope for redemption. So on its own, the cup was part of the discussion of redemption in the Passover meal and in the string of symbols and rituals and performance in the Passover Seder. So it wasn't originally specified for Elijah, like we've seen. A lot of the things weren't connected to Elijah originally, but it had its own association with redemption. And then, how did it shift to Elijah? So we have here a really wonderful discussion recorded in Worms in the 17th century, and a discussion of how ideas and wishes and what the heart asks for come together around the Seder table. So the cups are washed, one more than the members of the participants. So we are preparing the Seder table. And it is very important that every participant has 4 cups of wine. It is a central part of the ritual. And so we need to prepare glasses and cups for everybody. And you prepare one more. Because we read in the Seder text, let all who are hungry come in and eat. We are inviting everyone in. Great, so you have one more place setting ready for whoever will come. Therefore, a cup is prepared for a guest who will come. And it is called the cup of Elijah the prophet. Why? Because he is the anticipated guest. We want a guest to come. We are opening our house to a guest. Who is the guest that we most want to come? Elijah the prophet. And because we want him to come, we will name the glass after him in the hope that he will attend, that he will heed our invitation and accept. Also, the demons run from the mention of Elijah's name. This is an interesting addition because it discusses that Elijah is still not running he travels between the human realm and the heavenly realm. He runs in the same circles as demons, but he is positive and he can overcome the demons, and the demons run away from him, and he dispels them and protects against what the damage the demons can do. So we have here a wish that the one who we will open the door for and the one who will be the guest will be Elijah. And therefore, the cup is called Elijah's cup. And he is also connected to redemption. And the cup is connected to redemption, and we want Elijah to be connected to redemption. So here we have material culture that is expanding. And based on the legacy from inherited from the generations, and based on everything that converges together, we have a wanting the Messiah to come, right? We have this idea, one second, that Seder and Passover is discussing the redemption from Egypt with a look to the future. And we are symbolizing, at the end of reading about the Exodus, symbolizing the hope for the future through doing certain performative acts of opening the door and reciting the Shvo Chamatcha and having an extra cup of wine and wanting the Messiah to show up. And before the Messiah comes, we have Elijah, who declares the Messiah coming. And we have Elijah becoming more close and more personal, because Elijah can come and go, and he can be present in more than one situation. When the Messiah comes, he comes once. That's it. You open the door for Elijah, for Messiah at the end of the Seder. He's either there or he's not. And yes, we are opening it. What the source was saying, that we merit redemption by opening the door, is that belief that we are going to open the door because we are still believing in redemption, and through the merit of that belief, the redemption will be actualized. Opening the door for Elijah is opening the door for someone who is more of a familiar, who is also present in other things and already part of the community and known to members of the community. And he is being transported from the arena of the synagogue, of the collective space of where everyone meets together, and brought to the private home and invited in and given his own cup. So, bringing Elijah into the home and the expansion of materiality, we now have designated things that are made specifically for echoing Elijah's presence and signifying that he is invited and signifying that his presence is expected and incorporated and made space for. Okay, and they are the material objects prepared for Elijah are the ones that are signifying his presence, and also all of the, and holding all of the messages and all of the ideas that his figure carries with him. All right. One more interesting thing is how the chairs that were so central to signifying Elijah become symbols in and of themselves and start decorating other objects. It's not just the chairs themselves that are being decorated, but they become symbols to decorate something else. And there is an idea that especially connecting to other fabrics. If the chairs in the Middle Ages were decorated with rich fabric, and then in modern times we have fancy chairs, and now the fancy chairs are decorating fabric. It's a nice, interesting circle of material culture and visual communication. So, for another reason of draping the parochet from the synagogue, draping the sheet that is put in front of the ark, where the Torah scrolls are kept. So in some communities, he is explaining, this is from the mid-19th century in Livorno, Italy, is explaining a custom of using the parochet from the ark and draping it over Elijah's chair to signify that the Shekhinah, the heavenly presence, the divine presence, is present there just as it is present in the ark before which the parochet is hung. So here we have the use of a textile that is close to the holy, imbued with the holy, and brought to be draped on a chair to signify that there is a holy presence also in the chair. And here we also have, from around the same time, a parochet that is decorated with the objects that signify, and really you can identify circumcision objects, because this was sewn in honor of of a mohel, in honor of a circumciser. Now we have gradually the objects associated with circumcision ceremonies, and also are becoming personalized. If we had the chairs that were brought into the medieval synagogue to be part of the communal space, and they became part of the communal ceremony, now the chair is being used for personal glorification. And we have patrons, and we have donors, and we have a personal identity, personal identity of commemorating someone or honoring someone based on their personal connection to circumcision. So we have here a chair that was bequeathed by a mohel. It says on the front, bequeathed by a mohel. It's a double chair. We have Elijah's chair and the Baal Brit's chair, the Sandik's chair, together in one piece. We have a pillow that a child is carried on. We saw the child being carried in. So the pillow itself is also decorated with the visual symbols that show that it is for a circumcision ceremony. And we have these medallions that were made by a mohel, and apparently there are also a few examples of blank ones that you only had one side already prepared and the other side was blank, and he would engrave the child's that he circumcised and the date of the circumcision and give it to the parents to keep. And there's a hole in it, so it was probably worn on a cord or some sort of medallion. So we have here the objects that were meant to symbolize Elijah's presence now become symbols of the ritual itself and are incorporated into a different kind of material culture. Also, let's not forget about Elijah's cup. And from a cup that was an extra cup on the table to symbolize redemption, we have it turn into very much associated with Elijah, up into examples of commercialization and consumerism and modern popular culture and material culture of Judaism that is used in a plethora of ways, like this example of being for children in kindergarten, being able to decorate their own picture of Elijah's cup so that they learn about the objects that they are going to see at the Passover Seder table, and they can create something on their own with their own creativity and connection. And it comes in a package of 36, so that there's enough for everyone. Okay. As Elijah was moved from the arena of circumcision, carrying everything that he came with the legacy of showing up and being seen or not seen, bringing good tidings, being zealous for God, being zealous for Israel, and having to witness and bear witness to circumcision ceremonies. Once he was brought into that arena of ritual and of performative ritual, and then we saw how he was brought also into Passover Seder on the same themes of witnessing the loyalty of the Jews and the promise of redemption. He is also brought into other arenas, and he is signified in other places where Jews want to honor him and Jews want to invoke his presence and invoke him witnessing their performance of Judaism and bring good tidings and bring blessing, kind of like the father of Nisim Gaon, who sat on Elijah's chair so that his son would be blessed. And we have traditions of hanging a small chair for Elijah in the sukkah, for example. And we've mentioned having Elijah's chair part of other rituals, such as fertility rituals, or bringing it to a woman in labor, or processions through the city. And really this object, once it became an object that symbolized Elijah, it could be used in a diverse arenas and diverse uses. And we have a lot of creativity. And I would like to conclude and summarize where we came from. And really, looking through the lens of Elijah the prophet's character at medieval Jewry, we can understand better and in more detail and in more a richer palette of medieval Jewry itself. Focusing on Elijah lets us see particular connections and lets us see themes and lets us see expressions of ideas and rituals and identity that might have been known generally or made sense, but we were able to really see the self-expression of those themes and of that identity and of that self-awareness by looking at how Elijah the prophet was conceptualized. And also in the reverse, or it comes together, that Elijah the prophet coming in to the Middle Ages and being discussed and evoked and seen as a reflection of the self-identity of the community. And yes, they inherited a lot of themes and ideas, but he was molded particularly to the needs of the community to express their own experience, and he was an integral part of understanding their historic reality and from their past into their present and looking towards the future. Elijah the prophet emerges from medieval Jewry different than what he entered at the end of antiquity and the early Middle Ages. And the legacy that medieval Ashkenazi Jewry left of Elijah into the modern age, still their imprint on how we in modernity understand and conceive of and characterize Elijah the prophet is a product of the time that he spent in medieval Ashkenaz. Thank you very much.